The whisper implies intimacy or secrecy.
Stage 1 Whispered Puzzle.
We must consider the source's motivation.
You study the first fragment's small, unrelated objects that insist there is a pattern if you look long enough. Those initial ticks on the timeline say nothing, yet only the silence between incidents that begs an explanation. You pin the first victim link, forcing ambiguity into a shape that might mean something. You map a tentative radius, potential territory without anchors, a hypothesis waiting for weight. Entering raw points is a mechanical ritual, a scaffolding for the mind to climb into pattern. The forensic psychologist reads the same ambiguity and names it detachment aestheti, clinical distance that keeps threads tidy. You compulsively scan the matrix again, hunting for faint signs of escalation that might explain intent. A new file arrives, more coordinates, more fragments. The perimeter of the puzzle quietly grows. You face the empty motive grid, the space where hunger for pattern will someday write itself in cold ink. You translate fragments into a visual matrix, threading escalation markers into a structure that begins to feel inevitable. A highlighted passage names what you already suspect: detachment, phrased clinically but ringing like a confession. You argue over motivation versus signature, intent versus habit, because the distinction will change everything you predict. Stacking timelines reveals escalation, control tightens, windows narrow, and what was ritual becomes more frequent. Stage 3 Masking and Movement. You light up comfort zones on the map, soft green pools, where habits and routes fold into predictable territory. Route analysis lays out repeated movements. The same streets, the same turns, small preferences that anchor mobility. The file catalogs social masks and rehearsed alibis, a choreography designed to make presence feel ordinary. You and the analyst note how the facade endures under pressure, perfected gestures that keep the mind's designs invisible. A single anomaly appears on the strip, a tiny slip that betrays mounting internal strain. You let the signature object anchor the rules, a deliberate motif rehearsed until habit feels like doctrine.
Just a button.
The ordinary object becomes a fulcrum, a tiny ritual that holds the pattern together. You project the next escalation onto a blank wall, rehearsing the moment ritual tips into movement. You arrange identical pieces with obsessive care. A micro tremor betrays a fissure in the pattern's perfection. You sketch a private geographic profile on fogged glass anchor points and heat zones mapped inside your head. The city's rhythm reads like data, pedestrian flows, and openings folded into a behavioral grid. You test expressions in the mirror, smoothing edges until your performance slips unnoticed into daily life. You assign invisible markers to dates, windows of activity chosen for maximum anonymity. You walk the route in your mind, rehearsing turns, obstacles, and escape paths until they feel inevitable. Mundane items become tools of disguise, ordinary things that conceal intent by blending in. You cross-check signatures against routes, ensuring new movements don't fracture the established habit pattern. You scan crowds for soft targets and contextual cues, a cold calculation of vulnerability and opportunity. The selected neighborhood folds into your matrix, quiet streets that read like predictable opportunities. You script plausible alibis in shorthand, practice narratives meant to survive casual scrutiny. From a parked vantage, you watch an entrance, calculating camera angles and blind spots like coordinates on a map. The strain of holding multiple faces becomes physical, a fatigue that threatens to split rehearsed composure. You dissect a recent exchange, refining manner and tone so your camouflage feels less like theater and more like skin. Your hand-drawn chart connects movements and habits, a private schematic of control. You perform a final calibration, small objects aligned, routines tightened, the motive grid readied for action. Stage 4 Signature, Rituals and Slips.
The slip is here.
You perform the ritual, a needless, exact gesture that stamps your signature on the pattern. The chart now houses ritual elements, discrete markers tied to the illusion of stability. You replay the misstep a half beat off, a detail misaligned, the first tremor in a practiced routine. You rehearse the motion until muscle memory overrides the deviation, a compulsive correction to preserve the signature. A sealed evidence envelope hints at consequence, a trace cataloged where it can be matched back to pattern. A small slip warps the route in your head, introducing hesitation where there used to be seamless flow. You scan for changes in the environment, new cameras, lingering glances evidence that scrutiny might be shifting toward you. You comb motive grids for the origin of the error, a crack in detachment, or a flare of obsession that altered timing. A red X marks the breach, a sterile symbol for something that will ripple outward in consequences. You perform composure flawlessly in public, rehearse gestures masking the internal unraveling. You redraw territorial lines in a rush, attempting to outmaneuver a logic that is catching up to you. A near touch becomes proof, a procedural lapse that leaves a structural trace in the system. You begin to check over your shoulder reflexively, an emergent habit born of mounting paranoia. A crumpled scrap on the floor signals disorder, seeping into a previously immaculate routine. You sit with a rising dread, the psychological cost of the hunt tightening like a noose. An analyst points to a cluster on the board, the slips connect, and the pattern sharpens into detection. A highlighted line in a transcript captures the moment your social camouflage faltered under scrutiny. You detour without reason, a small avoidance that betrays perceived pursuit as rain begins. A fleeting glance at children playing reminds you of normalcy, a momentary, unsettling contrast to your obsession. Your hand trembles as the lock clicks, a tiny, audible consequence of the mounting psychological toll. The open binder and an unfinished profiling radius suggest a pause, not an end. The urge for pattern remains, patient and cold.